Hello everyone, I hope everyone is doing fine. So AWS offers you more than 200 services, and if you're a DevOps engineer, it can feel very overwhelming to figure out where to start. But there's a thing, you do not need to learn all those 200 services. In fact, there is a focused set of AWS services that every DevOps engineer uses day in and day out, from deploying the application to monitoring the infrastructure. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the essential AWS services every DevOps engineer should know. I'll also break down how DevOps engineer use each of these services, some real world use cases, and where they fit into your daily workflow. Let's get started. So since security comes first, let's start with the first and the most fundamental part of AWS security, that is IAM, Identity and Access Management. So this is where you control who can access what in your AWS environment. So you need to know some basic stuff in IAM. For example, creating a user and managing the user and his permissions, and managing the security credentials of the user. How can he sign in from the console, managing his multi-factor authentication, and creating access keys and secret access key for the user. Okay, you should know how to create a group, how to add a user to a group, and then assign some permissions to the group. In roles, you should know how to create a role. A role basically can be created for an AWS service, and this can be the use case where one service wants to access some other AWS service. You can take an example of EC2 instance wants to access S3 bucket, or Lambda wants to write logs to CloudWatch. So here one service wants to access another service, so you need to create a role for that service. You need to create a role for an AWS account. This can be useful when you have a use case where some services in one AWS account wants to perform some actions on another AWS account. Then in the policies, you should know how to create a policy, and you should be comfortable in reading any JSON based IAM policy. Being able to quickly interpret a policy can help you in both security as well as troubleshooting. So with IAM, your job is not just to create a user, but it's to create a secure, least privilege access across everything your DevOps workflow touches. Next up is EC2, or Elastic Compute Cloud. It's the most fundamental service of AWS, where you can create and manage virtual machines. So as a DevOps engineer, you will regularly launch EC2 instances to host your applications, to test your builds, and to run and deploy your automation tools. You will choose different instance types, AMIs, some network settings, and some IAM roles for your instances. So once your instance is running, you will have to monitor and manage your instances. You can stop your instances, you can start your instances, you can reboot, you can hibernate on, and you can terminate them. That is all part of infrastructure lifecycle management. So each EC2 instance runs on EBS volume or Elastic Block Store, and as a DevOps engineer, you should know how to create and manage a volume, how to attach and detach a volume, how to resize the volume, and without a downtime. Then you should know how to create a AMI from an instance, and how to create a snapshot, that is a point in time backup of your volumes. You should know how to copy the AMIs and snapshots from one region to another and then restore them. You should know how to encrypt the volume. And one thing obviously that you need to know is how to connect to a running instance. So there are multiple ways. You should know how to connect to an instance using EC2 Instance Connect. You should know how to connect to an instance using SSH client. Then you should also need to know how to connect using a session manager, which can be pretty useful in case where security is a top priority. EC2 is where you run, manage and troubleshoot workloads, and understanding storage, backups, and secure access makes you production ready. So each EC2 instance runs on EBS volume or Elastic Block Store. As a DevOps engineer, you should know how to create and manage a volume, how to attach and detach a volume, how to resize the volume, and without a downtime. Then you should know how to create a AMI from an instance, and how to create a snapshot, that is a point in time backup of your volumes. You should know how to copy the AMIs and snapshots from one region to another and then restore them. You should know how to encrypt the volume. And one thing obviously that you need to know is how to connect to a running instance. So there are multiple ways. You should know how to connect to an instance using EC2 Instance Connect. You should know how to connect to an instance using SSH client. Then you should also need to know how to connect using a session manager, which can be pretty useful in case where security is a top priority. EC2 is where you run, manage and troubleshoot workloads, and understanding storage, backups, and secure access makes you production ready. That you need to know about is the load balancing. So every enterprise ready application would be deployed on multiple servers. So load balancers will help you to distribute the traffic among all the servers. So AWS basically offers three types of load balancers: application load balancer, network load balancer, and gateway load balancer. So important ones that you should know as a DevOps engineer are the application load balancer and the network load balancer. Basically, you should know which load balancer to choose in which type of use case. So as a DevOps engineer, you will use application load balancer mostly in front of microservices, in front of ECS tasks or Kubernetes ingress controllers, because application load balancer supports host based and path based routing. Network load balancer you will use mostly when performance is a key, like for example some internal services for highly available ingress to databases or some legacy systems. So choosing the right kind of load balancer affects your application's availability, performance, and flexibility. So knowing which one to use is very critical. So the next thing that you should know about is auto scaling. So auto scaling is a key to handle traffic spikes and reduce cost. So as a DevOps engineer, you should know how to create an auto scaling group. So auto scaling group manages a fleet of EC2 instances, which ensures that the desired number of EC2 instances are always running. Auto scaling group automatically replaces the failed instances, and it's a perfect for self-healing infrastructure. Here you should know how to create a launch template. You should know what is automatic scaling, that is creating different scaling policies. So basically you have to know these three types of scaling policies: dynamic scaling policy, predictive scaling policy, and scheduled action. So in dynamic scaling policy, you again have three types of dynamic scaling policy: target tracking, step scaling, and simple scaling. You just need to know which scaling policy to use in which use case. So the next service that we are going to talk about is CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is the core observability tool every DevOps engineer must know. CloudWatch is a go-to service for monitoring AWS resources, setting up alerts, analyzing logs, and much more. You need to know is matrices. So CloudWatch automatically collects matrices from most of the AWS services like EC2, S3, Lambda, and many more. As a DevOps engineer, you will need to analyze these matrices to understand your system performance and the health. Then in CloudWatch, you should also know how to create alarms for proactive monitoring. So you can create an alarm to notify you when the metric crosses a threshold. For example, CPU utilization crossing 80% or disk space running low. Then you should also know about CloudWatch logs and log group. So CloudWatch logs lets you capture some log data from a EC2 instance, from a Lambda, or from other services. So logs are organized in the log group, and each log group has some log streams. In addition to the matrices that AWS gives you by default, you should know how to create your custom matrices for getting insights about your application. That you need to know is Amazon VPC. So VPC is the foundation of your cloud infrastructure. As a DevOps engineer, mastering a VPC is very important for designing secure, scalable, and reliable network on AWS. So before starting any of the VPC component, the first thing that you should know about is CIDR, or the classless inter-domain routing. So which defines the IP address range of your entire network. So if you get a CIDR, you should be able to understand what is the first IP in that range, what is the last IP in that range, and how many possible number of devices you can create in that network. You know the VPC components that you will use all the time. For example, how to create a VPC, how to create a subnet, route tables, internet gateways, elastic IPs, NAT gateways, VPC peering, ACLs, security groups. You also need to understand the flow of traffic, that how traffic flows in a VPC. Okay, this will help you in effectively troubleshooting and securing your network. Okay, the next essential components that you would need to know on a VPC are the NAT gateways and peering connections. So private subnets cannot reach the internet without an NAT gateway, and if you need VPCs to talk to each other, so you need a peering connection between them. Then you also need to have the knowledge of firewalls. So we have firewalls at two levels. We have security groups, which is at the instance level, and network ACLs, which is at the subnet level. So you also need to understand the basics of VPC endpoints. So there are two types of VPC endpoints: gateway endpoint and interface endpoint. So VPC endpoint can help an EC2 instance in the private subnet to privately connect to services, to various AWS services like S3, DynamoDB, API gateways, and there is no public internet required. Important thing for troubleshooting can be VPC flow logs. So VPC flow logs can help you understand and capture traffic which is going in and out of your network interfaces. Want to go deeper, you can also have a look at transit gateways, which can be used to connect multiple VPCs and the networks through a central hub. And you can also read about VPN, which can be used for linking your on-premises network to the AWS over internet. Route 53 is a DNS service that every DevOps engineer must be comfortable with. So on Route 53, you should first know about hosted zones. So Route 53 uses a hosted zone to store all the routing information. So inside a hosted zone, you can create records. So you have NS record and SOA record, which are by default created. But if you want, so additionally, you can create your own records. So there are different type of records. Most popular ones are A record and CNAME record. You should also know how to create an alias record to point a domain to a specific AWS resource, for example S3 or load balancer or CloudWatch distribution endpoint. Another important thing that you should know in Route 53 is routing policy. So routing policy is what makes Route 53 so powerful. So with the help of routing policy, you can define how traffic will flow based on geography, based on latency, based on weights, and you have so many other options. But for a DevOps engineer specifically, failure routing policy can be very important because it can help you to make your architectures disaster resilient. So next up is the most fundamental AWS service, that is S3. S3 comes under the category of object storage. Some of the use cases where you would be using S3 as a DevOps engineer would be to store artifacts like build outputs, configurations, or some deployment packages. You can use S3 as a backend for your Terraform state files, a bucket, and how to manage permissions on the bucket using bucket policy. Okay, you have to know some of the good security practices for securing the access on the bucket. Other very important thing which you should know in S3 is the different storage classes. You should know what these storage classes are designed for, that is their use cases. Then you also need to know the lifecycle configuration, how to create rules for managing the lifecycle of an object in the bucket. You also need to know how to create a replication rule, and this replication rule can play a very important role in when it comes to disaster recovery. Then you should also know about some other properties of a bucket like bucket versioning, encryption settings, and event notification, using which you can send a notification to any other service if any event occurs in a bucket. So you also need to know how to enable static website hosting. So S3 can basically be used for hosting static websites. It's a perfect for single page applications built with React, Vue, or Angular.